Fun.
And in that time, I occupied a variety of roles, from designer to writer to producer and beyond. I've been in the industry for 14 total years. Was a journalist in a previous life, including for outlets that died this year. I've written for tabletop, and card games, and board games. I've made comics. I've had the extreme blessing to share and exchange knowledge with people around the world from all walks of life, from executives to students. And if there's anything that I'm convinced of, and I'm so glad that the topics that have been covered in Playtopia have been about personal values, personal journeys, and how it impacts the games you make, because that's a lot of what this talk is about. There's two ironclad beliefs I have as a result of my experience, which has, across the past 14 years, given me a fairly comprehensive view of what it means to develop, promote, and release a game at almost every level of this medium. Is that there is one, no standard way to make a video game, and two, that the standard way of making games is failing everyone. You can see it, you can feel it. It's like the tremble in the air before a rainstorm. Players have an antagonistic relationship with the developers who make the games that make them feel alive, that give them something to look forward to coming home and doing. Developers have an antagonistic frenemy relationship with their publishers, battling back and forth on what a game even should be. What game do you want me to make so I can get some gosh dang money? Publishers are in a panic, closing down or living weird half-lives off of a couple of successful titles in their back catalog. Some of my games are in that situation. Because they don't know how much a game is going to cost. They don't know how long it's going to take. The idea of what a game is and how to build it, and whether or not it will be successful. The three things that any industry built on manufacturing needs are all in limbo. It leads to confused players, disappointed players, confused developers, broken developers, and publishers who are increasingly made to feel inept, impotent, following successes or chasing them rather than creating alongside developers the next experience that players need to play. Our industry is increasingly good at making games, but awful at producing them. And the distinction is critical because it's part of what's killing us right now. To make a game, our craft, that's mind-blowing. We're making games that if I, as a kid, could see 2024 video games, I'd just die. I'd poof off this stage, the time paradox would create a black hole, Playtopia would be the nexus for the destruction of the universe, because the idea of what a game can be has broadened beyond anything that I think a lot of people in this room would ever have conceived. But if you ask any developer in this room, how long will it take to turn your prototype into a full game, buddy?
A week.
Ain't no one got a fucking clue. And if you have one or two times in your career where that's the case, that's relatable, that's funny, ha ha ha, the audience goes. It's a polite joke that brings us all together, yes. But if that is a universal experience, if after 20 years of practicing craft, your precision with your tools has not improved or changed, that's not a funny ha-ha joke anymore. That's an existential crisis. That is, in a very real way, an institutional and cultural failure. And the fact that as we continue to discuss craft, how do we make better video games? How do we be healthier people as we make those video games? And we haven't simultaneously learned how to fit a time and a budget, it means that all of the equations go increasingly out of whack, and like any ecosystem, when dysfunction rules, unhealthy coping mechanisms take their place. It results in a binary equation, which publishers and platforms will not say it in so many words, but the actual terminology, the basis upon which decisions are being made, is first of all, that I have been told to my face that publishers expect when you pitch them a game for it to take 2 to 5 times its budget and timeline. This is why it seems like publishing scouts are always trying to get your game, but also you don't know if they need your game or if they have money, because everything takes more time and more money until it comes out and no one knows how much money it's going to make. And that's standard for a hit-driven industry. You can look at any other vector of entertainment, but film has a script. It has an entire process. You can budget to an exact level what a film will cost, and if it goes over, there's people held accountable. In games, we have no such accountability or instinct. And so every game is a Schrodinger's object of risk, which means that publishers are simultaneously, even platforms, are simultaneously pushing for the most ambitious thing that can happen, and also being like, please God, I don't know when the game will come. It looked really cool. It was a game jam. Everybody loved it. It's been 5 years. The equation that results, the unhealthy coping mechanism, is that people throw up their hands. If you have more time and more money, you'll get a better game. I was at one point told by a publishing platform executive, who I respect and who I'm very close friends with. He said, here's the base level facts, Xalavier. My entire thing for my studio has been better, faster, cheaper, and healthier. I run a place called Strange Scaffold. Released a game most recently called I Am Your Beast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Displayed out there. El Paso Elsewhere, our previous title.
Woo!
Thank you. Being adapted into a major motion picture with Lakeith Stanfield.
Oh yeah, dude.
We just announced we're making a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game.
Oh, yeah!
Shit.
Turn-based. They let me kill Shredder and Splinter. Fuck yeah. First curse word associated with my partners at Paramount. That'll be great. The entire idea that Strange Scaffold wanted to make wild things in a reasonable way is what I thought, as a kid who grew up with nothing, would make me safe. Yes, I am black. Yes, my parents got married in Las Vegas while my mother was pregnant, and they were in a hotel room where their bed was covered in blood, and they just had to shove it in the corner and not think about it. But I will show you that I can make games consistently. And one of the wake-up calls I have had in my life is I had a conversation with this friend of mine after months of talks. And he said, here's the thing, Xalavier. When you bring a game to the table and say it will take 2 years, we know you will make that game in 2 years and that it will be good. But when someone comes to the table and says it will take 4 years, and it becomes 6 years, it looks like they're going to do something more ambitious. It looks like they want to do something that changes games. This is the mindset, the gambling adjacent, indie game the movie dream.
Yep.
That still rules the way we make games. And not only do we know that this equation does not result 100% of the time in better games, better selling games, we've got so many examples, including from this year, to point to. In indie and AAA, more time and more money does not a better game necessarily make. But even though it doesn't make sense, if it is the only equation that gets to exist by default, suddenly everyone has to play by its rules. And in the process, not only do a whole host of games, clicker isn't quite working, not only do a whole host of games not get to exist, because not every game benefits from infinite time and money, Not every game can generate infinite time and money. Sometimes you're making My Daddy Doesn't Love Me game, and it's just not gonna work unless you make it in 3 months or less. Given a year of dev time, all you've done is mutually spend each other's money and look into each other's eyes and say, I hope this works. I've been on several of those dev teams. I've run a couple of those dev teams. When we say more time and more money equals better games, we disqualify people who can't fit this equation. And so, speaking very frankly, attitudes and funding behaviors that would rightfully be called racism, sexism, xenophobia, and regional bias, instead get to wear a cloak of commercial validity. It's not, we aren't going to give this female dev team money to make a game. It's, we don't see the market for this game. Has anyone here heard that?
Yeah.
It's not, we aren't going to give a black dev team this amount of money. It's, we don't believe they have the level of experience to pull this game off. One, where are they going to get the experience? And two, this is a team of 4 women of color who've been in the industry, each of them about 10 years, longer than you've been in the industry, Chuck. Where are you getting the idea that they don't have the experience to build this game from, Chuck? It's the market research that you didn't do. Correct. This equation says that people like me, from working class backgrounds, from other regions, from backgrounds that are underrepresented in games, don't get to make games in the first place. Because we don't have access to more money and time. And so invisibly, players are deprived of the things that could change their worlds. Of the genres that they are craving, but just simply don't fit into a Steam tag right now that's selling. I can't tell you how many Stardew Valley precursors were pitched at every level and didn't get funded until Stardew Valley took off. And on one hand, is that the market? Yes. On the other hand, is evidence of an industry that, despite unparalleled ability to make money, is terribly bad at both producing projects and then believing in them on a fundamental level, because we don't think about and believe in people in the first place. So for the next roughly half an hour, I want you to destroy in your mind the idea of the standardized game studio. This is not a doom and gloom talk, contrary to how it started. This is a talk about agency. There is no standardized way to make a game. There is no standard picture of 3 buddies, best friends, one's a programmer, one's an artist, and one's a musician, they're gonna make a game, yeah. There is no one idea of how to make a game for the next half hour. Instead, we're going to start from brass tacks, from basic principles, from the things that make sense, to confront an industry of nonsense and ship games. Because when we ship games, and when we ship games in a way that empowers us on a personal level, who we are as human beings, as much as what we do in individual levels of our craft, we get to survive, we get to make more games, we get to, at minimum, look at the thing we've made and say, I'm glad that exists in the first place, and can't a single fucking person on earth stop me from doing it. This talk is called Do the Thing That Makes Sense, and that's what we're going to talk about doing. Step number 1, your buddy who does not answer texts should not send a publisher.
It's not going to be you. I'm sorry. You can't be. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
I've stated about some very lofty goals for this talk, but the starting point, not all that lofty, very practical. I have the opportunity to talk to dozens, if not hundreds of people every year. I make time for it, to hear about where they're at, what's happening in games, and what they can or should do next. And you'd be surprised how often I talk to sometimes entire teams in just a Zoom call. Well, Discord call, I don't like Zoom. And I'll hear about different responsibilities. I hear about the different personalities that make up this team, who they are as people. And there's almost inevitably, in a group, I'll call this type of person a Bucky. Bucky has never sent a text back in less than 1 calendar week since the 90s. Either they volunteered when just like responsibilities got split up in abstract for the studio, or worse, they got assigned the responsibility to send emails that required timely responses. That doesn't make sense. But it also doesn't match our cultural idea of how we talk about game teams in the first place. We talk about them as a collection of disciplines and not as individual people, some of whom don't answer their texts. And if they don't answer their text one more damn time, they don't get to access the repo anymore. That isn't to say you don't start your studio with the Bucky in your life. They could be incredibly talented. They could be amazing in all variety of other ways, but you don't put them in a position to fail, at least not without really explicit discussion beforehand of why and how everyone in the room is doing it. Speaking of, why do you, a night person, have studio meetings scheduled at 9 in the fucking morning? I'm seeing some people fighting each other in the crowd. You of all people know that it is a crime to make someone wake up before 10 a.m. You'd be surprised how often I talk to teams about how they do what they do. And I hear several people in the group, if not all of them, say, yeah, I feel really energized like a little after midnight. That's when I get my best work done. I can really focus, and sometimes I'll send messages back and forth to the other guys, and that's when we work. I'm like, okay, so when's your first meeting? They're like, oh, stand-up is at 9. Why? If you get to choose, why have you done this to yourselves? It turns out they saw a GDC talk where just their picture of a job started from the standardized idea of like, well, work starts at 9. When they could just live their life briefly among the daywalkers, work at night, and make sure that they see sunlight at some point. That's what they're doing already. They just also have a really painful meeting that they could all cancel or move. That's what it means to not make games in a way that makes sense. It starts from the personal. It starts from recognition and communication in so many ways. Making a game is the start of a long-term relationship. If you're a solo developer, it's a relationship with yourself and the dark abyss. So if you're going to start your studio, if you're going to start making this game, that long-term relationship begins with values. That begins with who you are. It depends on if you're going to have kids or have dogs or have both, because God help you.
This guy.
The idea that the beginning of your project creates not just what your studio and your day-to-day life looks like, but what your project becomes is somehow a foreign concept in our media. We understand as kids that if you put Play-Doh into the star machine, it makes little stars. If you put it into the square machine, it makes little squares. But you put a bunch of nocturnal people into a studio that does work from 9 to 5, we think that's fine, that's okay, that's blessed by God. It's not. We're asking questions of ourselves that we would ask anyone deciding to make a large commitment. Do you have debt? Does your friend who you're making the studio with, maybe your partner, do they have debt? That's going to change the type of studio you make. That's going to change the type of decisions you make under pressure. It's not that you don't work with that person. It's that this needs to be reckoned with in the first place. The reckoning is the important part. How do you communicate? Do you know? Maybe you should go there. I used to think that all developers, and especially studio heads, should go to therapy. Now I think all developers and studio heads, including myself, should go to therapy. That gets a clap. Not when I was teaching kids profanity, this. Okay. therapy talk. I guess Playtopia likes mental health. How you communicate. Do you like to do your work submerging and then popping up for error and then submerging again? Do you like constant check-ins? How you bounce off of people is a fundamental part of the way you even live. If you don't know, that is knowledge you can gain. And if you and the people in your studio don't communicate in the same ways, you either have a barrier to cross, or I have literally seen this sink studios. Two people who in crunch time are the only people who can ship this game, communicate in fundamentally different ways, have not communicated with each other, come to slowly despise each other in ways only mirrored by like the last days of a marriage. We all know who the kids are staying with for Christmas, but right now the kids don't want to be with either one of them. How you communicate. Do you have debt? How every piece of your life works with the others to either support making something that you and your players love or not is game development. There are some of you in this room who I can see looking around. We're here for the design part of the talk. I talked about design pitfalls. You're like, why aren't we talking about, making the game? It's because we've spent far too long in dreamland in the first place. We haven't made the idea of games and making games and games as craft. We haven't spent almost any time at all making that practical, making it subject to the laws of cause and effect, making it something that you can look at a piece of paper and say, this doesn't make sense. That is the root upon which you get to make real decisions for yourself. Decisions that even if you're compromising your values, you do so in really intentional ways that means you can wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and believe in what you're doing and how you're doing it. When games as a culture robs you of that, and you don't give it to yourself, what you're left with is luck. And I've seen luck go really, really well for my friends. And what it leaves them with is shattered. They spend years picking up the pieces, figuring out if they want to make games again at all. And then when they start again, the heartbreaking piece of it is they're again starting from a basis without self-knowledge, without understanding that your business, the pieces of paperwork, the ideas of how you even set up your Slack or Discord server, that is your art. It is a place from which your art emerges. If you don't make those decisions, if you don't decide what paint you paint with, someone will decide for you. Or you're going to end up with a really messed up palette, and the temptation is, if it goes well, to think, well, then that's just my process. I'm just a rock star, man. Come to me 5 years later when you haven't shipped game number 2.
Hell yeah, dude.
Your business is your art. Your life is your art in so many different ways, and they don't have to be in opposition, screaming at each other in order to function in the first place. When you operate from self-knowledge and from intentional practice, you can see the pieces that didn't work. And hear me out. You can change them. No. Did you know that if you have a coworker who's just bad, you don't gotta work with that guy on the next game. He's not part of the secret magic. There's 9 million musicians who will kill each other to get his job. I'm not speaking of brutal cannibalistic decisions. I'm saying you can have a heart-to-heart with this dude. Dudette, whatever they happen to be, and say you're gone. Because this, in a symphony, is the weird mouth trumpet that doesn't work. So, for those of you who are looking for the piece of this that relates to your actual game, what we need to confront is the idea of capital D design. Design is dream, design is God. I just want to make a good game. If I just make a good game, if I just make a well-designed game, if the game fulfills its design, which was great. When I wrote the GDD 2 years ago, it was great. We could all agree it was great. The publisher said it was great. That imagery and concept in games is frankly bullshit. The best design is the game that ships and that you don't die in the process, and then you move on to make the next game, learning in the process to make a better thing. Your next thing might not be better. In every other medium and industry, we understand that sometimes it is people's 5th thing, their 10th thing, that really captures who they are. And in games, we stake it all on one. Like the worst gambler of all time. This is partially because of how we think about design too. Not just the business of games, not just the lack of reckoning. It is the idea that when we make a thing, we're trying to fulfill the grand vision of the thing and not making a practical project which will release on Steam in 6 months, and you want to add how many languages? That's not how that works. Design that is not shippable is bad design. And you can see this in a design doc. You have a 3-person team. You're going to have 28 ships in your sci-fi game. Unless you make a very specific process for making those ships and differentiating them and balancing them and having all that work, you're either not going to ship that game, you're not going to ship it on time. Why does it have 28 ships? Is it because you want it to have 28 ships? That's not great. Design should answer questions. We don't often talk about this. This is part of why people don't read GDDs. I have read thousands of pieces of documentation in my time. I'm often stunned by how often they actually answer the questions of what the game is. They tell me that it will be a roguelite, because roguelites make money. And you know what? The commercial realities, sometimes that is just a piece of your design. Question answered. But they say it's a roguelite, they say we'll have combat, they say each little section and piece of the game, but not how they work together, how each piece is supposed to function, how it's supposed to define all that. We're just supposed to work that out later, and guess what? That's not just bad design, that's being a bad partner. That's like saying our kid will take ballet, and then just throwing the child into a pool and then running in the other direction. Leaving your other partner to pick them up out of the pool and figure out what clothes go in the ballet and where they get the clothes from and what ballet studio they will go to. Design that does not answer questions is bad design, and it is rampant in this medium. Because we don't talk about design as a problem-solving, practical logistic. We talk about it as a dream. We're going to make a game that makes combat feel really good. Like how many fucking games that have come out in the past 50 gosh damn years, buddy? What does that mean? How do you accomplish that? It has a stun system like Sekiro. Ooh! What does that actually do? What does it mean? And if you get irritated thinking over that question, you found the problem. It feels like too much, and that's because it is, and it's because we're leaving the problems if only for our later selves. And it's breaking our games, it's breaking our relationships with our players. It's meaning that we went from making concrete things, often defined by our limitations, to having so few limitations in a lot of practical technological ways, and instead running against the grounds of our own hubris instead. Designers, developers, we're here to answer questions. We're here to ship games. We're here, if anything, to give some voice to our creative spark. And for a very, very small percentage of you, just making the thing and tinkering is enough. The rest of you want to ship games. Not make games, not tinker on games, not have a Unity project that you work on in your spare time for years. I have 2 friends in a career of thousands who have that. That's the way they work. They just want to have a thing that they make. They make games, they never ship it. That is their hobby. That's their personal practice. It's like building Gundam, but it's little systems that no one else will see. Most people in this room don't or can't afford to work that way. And guess what? That means you need to answer questions. That means you need to exist in the realm of the practical. That means you need to do things that make sense and bring your ideas around making games into the realm where you and the people around you can make meaningful, empowered decisions in a holistic context. If your design is not working with art, it's bad design. If your design is not working with music, it's bad design. If your project document, again, your pitch is just saying stuff and all of the things have not been evaluated to say whether or not it can exist or not, you are doing the equivalent of making a Hollywood movie without a script. Every single time that comes out, everybody goes, ooh, they made a movie without a script. This is going to be a disaster. Games does that every day. And then it wins an IGF award, and we say in hindsight, that's why it won an IGF. No. It was one of the lucky ones. We're fortunate to be in a medium where we have a lot of lucky ones, and the thousands of others that crash and burn never get heard from at all. There's another person pitching a Devolver. We can change this. We are changing this in bits and pieces, and often it is the bits and pieces part of the equation. The fact that now when I talk to students, they're like, we're going to get a producer. I'm like, does the producer get to tell you no? And they're like, why would they tell me no? Yeah, that's the problem. When you don't consider other pipelines, when you are making games, but not thinking of it as a concrete thing that needs to exist at a time and a budget, that's when the questions really emerge. Are you pursuing a hobby, or are you a professional? I'd hazard to say that there's a lot of developers who are not professionals. And the worst moments of my career, the moments when as a creative director I have hurt my peers, is when I have not been a professional. By virtue of ignoring questions like this. Considerations like this. I'm meaningfully pausing, but also trying to get this slide to work. There we go. Originally, we've entered the abyss. Those solo developers of you will recognize it. Originally, this slide said, if it sounds too ambitious, it probably is. But the point of this talk isn't to reduce your ambition. It isn't to make game development less of a dream. It's to say, is this gonna exist? And if it doesn't have a clear path on every level, guess what, buddy? You and your collaborators can collaborate to make that possible with your producer that you saw a GDC talk that you probably have one, and you hired as a result. Design doesn't have to be new to be good. A lot of us aren't making new games, really, anyway. I mean, I just made a first-person shooter. Woo! We've been making those for years and years and years and years. A lot of the way that we shipped it in 9 months is because we didn't come in saying, so, imagine combat, a gun, a man. We have hundreds of precedents in the genres in which we work. You're making a side-scrolling platformer with a dash system. If you aren't like just sometimes just straight up copying that shit, what are you doing? That's what makes the thing exist. You build upon the work of your peers and you carry it forward. You have a new idea, you test it almost as soon as you can to see if it will work with the rest of the things you're doing, and you move it forward. On a holistic level, as a medium, you push forward what games can be. Not by reinventing the wheel and then at the last minute making a wheel because you got ship. But by figuring out what type of wheel you want to make in the first place. It's going to be blue this time. Thank God, someone with ideas. If that sci-fi shooter with 28 ships sounds like it probably won't ship, One of the words, by the way, that I hate most in meetings these days, having worked on so many games, is probably. Like, we probably can't fit this, and I'm like, then let's not. We can add more ships later. We can start with 3.
Yeah.
It will probably still be too much. We'll end up with 2. Why would we say 28 in the first place and have the engineers spend 3 weeks, 2 months of a 2-year dev time? That 2 months is critical. He's going to spend 2 months making sure that we can have up to 28 ships when we probably won't end up there in the first place. Probably is bad. Probably is an open question. And open questions are the pitfalls between you and making your game a reality. Making a game in a way that makes sense. If it sounds like I'm saying that most problems in game development are avoidable and our own fault, it's because I am. And it's because I'm tired. It's because I've worked on too many fucking games to say anything more nuanced or less blunt. When you work on over 100 games with so many different people and so many different scales, what you realize is most people think that their problems are special and they get to because games take too damn long to make in the first place.
Right.
It's like, our game is like Mega Man, but you see, we're special. The shooting wasn't fun. Yes! That is a problem that's been solved so many times. You're having this problem because your designer is nocturnal, and you don't talk to him. A lot of problems in game development are avoidable. They are questions of logistics, and logic and cause and effect, and it is our abstraction of it, our cultural refusal to bring this core into practical terms that ends up hurting not just us, but the people who join our medium. They follow in our footsteps and say, the mistakes you made are why you were able to be successful, right? And they trip and fall over our same pitfalls. And then, unlike us, sometimes they don't get back up again. Particularly when we have visibility, particularly when we are the adults, quote unquote, in the room. I've name dropped a few times in this talk, but I'm not targeting any specific designer or studio or game or publisher or former workplace. That's very important to say. I'm talking about the culture of games. I'm talking about the wonderful things I have had the opportunity to see in South Africa from this dev community about practicing craft with precision and intentionality and with self-awareness. Because when we don't, the coping mechanisms are dire. I am talking to publishing executives regularly who tell me that if they can't find a Steam tag that aligns with the game, there's a very small chance they'll publish it. How many games does that target? Locking it away from our audiences. Games they would have loved to play. How many studios does that kill outright? But because no one says it out loud, no one's posted it on Twitter and then screenshotted it and made someone into a bad guy, they present their atypical game and find a blank wall of rejection instead. I'm talking to people at larger studios saying, well, the last game in our franchise or a franchise in our adjacent genre didn't sell because it was trying to do something new. So we're just going to really focus on our core. Yes, our core is white males between 18 to 25, but we're different. We're going to make the combat good. Yeah.
Shooting gonna be fire.
I talked to people at a variety of levels who are like, you know what? What's really exciting is the dev scene in Southeast Asia and South America, and they're right. But then they say, because we can get the same games for cheaper. The implicit threat there is that when you can't get your 5-year Metroidvania for an exponential cost down, or when that team simply argues, hey, we're making this same game at the same level of quality or better, we would like the same level of support, that support will get taken away. This is what a medium that doesn't make sense does to cope with not building any structures to change the base level reality. We get to make better games when we survive. We get to take better care of each other when we survive. We have more ability for our games to reach people when we survive. So looking at an industry that does not care for your survival, looking at processes maybe even within your own life and relationship with others that do not prioritize your survival, I have good news. You can change it. It may not be easy. It may not be as holistic as you'd like it to be, but dear God, you can change it. I've done it at every scale. I've done it at AAA. They told me it couldn't be done. Guess what? It's just a timeline and a budget, the same thing that every other industry has done for hundreds of years. Games is unique. It's special, but it's also real. It's real because of people like the people in this room. And when we all treat these games as real, when we treat our processes and our personhoods as real, and then work from them and then improve upon them, we get to make the games that we dreamed of making, we're told we never could. That gets to become a reality. You buy for yourself that future by making one ship instead of 28. By not having your friend Bucky send the publisher emails when he doesn't answer texts. By maybe getting a little bit of therapy. When you change your processes, you change your projects too. And you can be the thing that makes sense in a senseless world. And if there's anything I've seen at Playtopia, if there's anything I've seen in our wider industry, it's not just a craving for anything that makes sense. It is the capacity to do it uniquely in this time right now, particularly when we help each other. Thank you.